Siddhan Sibol, let's talk about what the Prime Minister did say, that India continues to be the voice of the global South. He did reiterate calls to have the African Union be enjoined as a full member of the G20. He also said that Quad has emerged as a major force of good for the region. He's basically talking about the issues in the Indo-Pacific and saying that they need America's help in, combating some of these issues that are currently going on in the Indo-Pacific. Why do you think it is important for the Prime Minister to harness or to actually speak about these issues that are happening in the Indo-Pacific in relation to America, for example?
To Indo-Pacific, there are a range of issues the Indian Prime Minister talked about. Let me start with Africa. Now, the Indian Prime Minister had suggested the idea that African Union should be given a membership of the G20 grouping, and that makes the grouping G21 then, of course. And the idea, of course, has been accepted by the Americans. The American president has given his approval for that. And this shows that how India has been essentially reaching out to Africa. It understands Africa. It wants to be the voice of Africa as well. And it also is focusing on engagement with Africa in terms of education, in terms of defense, and in terms of high-level visits as well. Now, coming to Indo-Pacific, well, this is a region which has great geopolitical contestation with rise of a very, very aggressive China. And both India and the United States are working with each other in almost every way possible to make sure that there is a semblance of a rules-based order, something it looks like China is not keen or perhaps too much aggressive, that destroys the entire idea of a rules-based order. It has its territorial issues with countries from Japan to India. It has been aggressive with India in its northern border. So both India and the US are acutely aware of it and are working together to make sure that a strong message is being sent to Beijing.
Susan Teherani, also the topic on the war in Ukraine was also something to focus on. The Indian Prime Minister did say that India was completely ready to help Ukraine's peace efforts. From the very beginning of the events in Ukraine, India has laid emphasis on the resolution of the dispute through dialogue and diplomacy. India is completely ready to help Ukraine's peace efforts. This is according to the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, while he was giving that press conference a speech. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, do you think America is sort of getting more people involved, and this includes India?
Well, it hopes to. The United States and NATO countries hope to get more people on board with their way of resolving the Ukraine-Russia crisis. However, Prime Minister Modi, while alluding to the fact that India believes that the global order is based on the principles of the UN Charter, sovereignty and territorial integrity, that really is in support of Ukraine when you say that. But also, India in general has been very shy in accepting the way the United States and NATO has been carrying out their foreign policy against Ukraine, and they've always called for peace and dialogue. When the time for a negotiated settlement comes, which will eventually come, the United States will definitely need India by its side for this negotiated settlement. And I think it was also just very interesting when we were talking about China. I thought that it was very a nuanced point where he said we share our resources with those who need them. We build capabilities, not dependencies. I think this was really a very sly note to China, considering the fact that China is known to create dependencies because of the debt that it creates in many countries. And what he said in that speech to Congress regarding capabilities and dependencies is exactly, once again, in line with what the Biden administration has been saying and trying to move its policy in the Indo-Pacific.
Susan, thank you for that, because I was just about to talk about China, and President Biden defended his harsh public comments on China, including calling President Xi Jinping a dictator, saying his words would have no negative impact on US-China relations, and that he still expects to meet the president of China in the near future. Sidhan Sibol, talking about this, some critics say that America is wooing India to counter China. Is that so?
Well, this equation goes in every sense possible. Many would say the Pakistanis are being wooed by the Chinese to make sure that India is kept under check. But additionally, I can only say this only, that when it comes to India-US relationship, this is a relationship that has seen a gradual evolution. It started its process of evolution in the first decade of this century, when China was perhaps not as aggressive as it is today. And we have seen the nuclear deal essentially of 2005 being that break from the past when it comes to India-US relationship. And since then, the relationship has only grown in leaps and bounds. One thing I can say is China acted as a catalyst for India and, of course, United States along with Australia and Japan to come together under the Quad rubric and focus on positive agenda, to use the phrase of officials of the Quad member countries. But China, of course, is fearful of the Quad. It sees it as an Asian NATO. But all in all, China today is a worry. It is part of every conversation in every relationship. And not many would say they would like to contain China, but the fact of the matter is that China is trying to form its own global rules. And if you do not go by the rules, then you perhaps face the consequences.
Well, joining us now is our correspondent Molly Gambhir. Molly Gambhir, good to see you. Modi says India and the United States are the two biggest democracies of the world and can contribute towards global peace, stability and prosperity, as he asserted that for the partnership between the two countries, even the sky is not the limit. When it comes to development in India, we see that the Indian Prime Minister is wooing investors from America to come to India and improve the economy or the economical status of the country. What are the merits of that?
Right, Eric, just look at the labels that the Indian Prime Minister and the US President have used to describe where the India-US relationship stands at this point. The Indian Prime Minister calling it a new dawn in the relationship, which will determine the destinies of not just the two countries, but also of the entire world. The American President talking about how the relationship is among the most consequential at this point. And the two sides hailing overall the potential that their partnership has, also the opportunities that lie ahead. Speaking specifically about defense cooperation and economic ties, also the sharing of technology, which have remained the central themes of this relationship, but also how the interests converge when it comes to ensuring free and open Indo-Pacific, something that the Indian Prime Minister also spoke about just a short while back, talking about how the stability of the Indo-Pacific region is among the central concerns of the relationship. And both the India and the United States realize the importance of having each other as a partner in that respect, more so given how the developments have panned out recently vis-a-vis China. Beyond that, the US wants to fortify its relationship with India when it comes to defense and manufacturing. Also, it sees India as a very crucial market, wants to also wean New Delhi's military away from Russia and help the US supply chains also wean away from China. So that is what the expectation here in the United States has been as far as the crucial state visit of the Indian Prime Minister is concerned, which has already, given out a number of key takeaways in terms of the bilateral meeting, also the Indian Prime Minister's address to the joint session of the US Congress, the second time he addressed the US Congress, where he also spoke about how the partnership between the two sides has limitless potential. and how the chemistry in the relations between the two sides is effortless. And when the Indian leader spoke about the country's linkages with the United States and stressed upon how when the two sides work on semiconductors, when the two sides work on critical minerals, then that does help diversify supply chains. So that's just one sample of the many ways in which India and the United States are looking at boosting their relationship going forward. And this visit is a huge catalyst in that direction.
Just before I go to Susan, let me tell you what is happening currently. Guests are arriving at the White House. We are expecting the Indian Prime Minister to make his way to the White House for the state dinner, which is hosted by President Joe Biden and the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. This is quite significant for the Indian Prime Minister and also for America. We will see, as you can see on your screens, guests making their way into the hall where the dinner will be hosted. Susan Teherani, this is the second time that the Prime Minister has made a speech before the Congress. How much time should we give the Congress for a sort of feedback on some of the issues that the Prime Minister pointed out in the chamber?
You know, with the advent of social media and Twitter in particular, and the news cycle, I mean, we probably get immediate feedback even as we're speaking right now, as some were very vocal in supporting Prime Minister Modi. You know, you can just put out a video very quickly. But in terms of a consensus regarding the issues that he discussed, I think the way it was received with the standing ovations and the clapping, it's a rare piece of bipartisan support that India-U.S. relations should really go that extra mile. And it's beneficial not only for President Biden's party, but of course for the Republicans as well. Republicans, of course, and even former President Donald Trump was a big fan of establishing relationships with India, and that continues in the halls of Congress as well. You know, you talked about Congress. I just want to say I think it was very interesting that he alluded to the Samosa Caucus, which has been a term known, basically an informal grouping of Indian American lawmakers who either take part in the House of Representatives or the Senate. So, you know, considering the fact that there are 5 Indian origin, Indian American members of Congress, I think says a lot about just how intertwined the Indian American community is, not only the diaspora, but in lawmaking, and of course Kamala Harris as well.